Hello everyone, welcome to From the Star Wars Home Video Library. I'm your host Nathan P. Butler, author of A Saga on Home Video, which is in its second edition as hardbacks, paperbacks, or Kindle copies now through Amazon. Make a nice little late Christmas gift kind of thing, right? Right? Maybe? Anyway, enough plugging of that, though I'm sure I'll do it in the other two videos I'm recording today, just for good measure. But welcome, we are checking out something here that I actually didn't know existed until I found it. And I was like, what is this? I went through, and it was cool enough that I did some extra research on this, and holy crap, it kind of blew my mind, because it is, by far, my favorite Star Wars documentary in a form that I had never seen before. Now, to circle back, not to this documentary, but a similar one, let's look back at Empire of Dreams, right? We all know that Empire of Dreams was the big documentary that was a big draw for the original release of the original trilogy on DVD in 2004, where it had that bonus disc, one disc for all three films, that included a special documentary. That was Empire of Dreams. And we saw that there were also Empire of Dreams screeners out there, whether we were talking about the ones on VHS or the ones on DVD. And we found that when you actually did a comparison between the screeners that were put out for like Emmy consideration and the documentary as presented on the DVDs in 2004, they actually weren't the same. The aired version on television on A&E was the one that was used for the screeners, which makes sense because it was screeners for A&E to try to get nominations for a television program. But that meant that the version that was on the screeners was about an hour and a half long, whereas a much longer version was what was found on the DVD release. And a long time later, this came up. This was that Empire of Dreams preview DVD from one of the companies behind it, Prometheus Entertainment. And we saw this a while back in an episode. It was kind of a cool way to have it. Another, basically a screener, a preview DVD. But it was from them, and the question was what was on it. And I did a side-by-side comparison, and it turns out that this is the same thing that's on the 2004 DVDs, effectively, whereas that means that the finished versions on the preview DVD and the DVD sets, they are the longer cut of the documentary. The shorter cut, but still a finished version, can be found on those screeners. But Prometheus had their own preview DVD of this thing that they worked on that was not something I was familiar with at the time. But that is not my favorite Star Wars documentary. My favorite actually aired in 2007 on History Channel and has never seen a retail home video release whatsoever. But boy, does it have a lot of screeners and preview type material out there. It's actually the first screener I believe I ever owned because I was handling StarWarsFanWorks.com at the time. I was doing podcasting stuff and whatnot, and I was actually sent a review copy of that documentary on a DVD to do some sort of preliminary review stuff to kind of build up some hype for it heading into its actual airing on television. That is Star Wars The Legacy Revealed, which looks at Star Wars in the context of history and mythology and its impact on the world. This was that screener DVD. I don't know that I really need to cover up the contact information here, but just in case any of that is still active, this was basically sent out to fan sites. It was a DVD-R, but it was an unfinished copy of that particular special. Still fun to watch, but unfinished. It didn't have Robert Clotworthy, the final narrator, in it, and you would sometimes see clips that they were using of like archival footage or whatever, where you actually had the runtime still running on it, and then underneath the actual program itself, the runtime was running down there as well. Then, eventually, I became aware of other screeners, one of them being an Emmy screener of this thing, which again, we've looked at before. And this Emmy screener sent out for Emmy consideration, it was a finished DVD and was the finished special. Effectively the same run times, basically, but this one, of course, would have the final narrator, all those time codes gone, basically exactly as it would have aired on History Channel. Then there was a similar version, as far as the label goes, but on a DVD-R, that was sent out for press reviews after it actually aired. So this is another finished version of the special, the press screener. So I had been aware at one point of those three screeners, the one that I owned and then the two that I kept running across on places like eBay for the Emmy screener and press screener using essentially the Emmy as the base of it, the Emmy screener as the base of it. And then later, I acquired, thanks to a fellow collector, Luc Bastier, I believe, this here, which is a more elaborate version of a screener for this that opened up and had inside it a t-shirt and this little thing with sort of flipping information plus a disc of like art assets and whatnot, but then another screener here with this artwork specifically for the special. But weirdly enough, as fancy as this one was, you may recall from when I covered it here on the show that this too, as it's flapping back in my face, this too was an unfinished version of the special. And as far as I knew, that was it. I mean, I didn't even know the fancy one existed until it was, brought up in the Star Wars Home Video group. So I had assumed that was it. I hadn't counted on good old Prometheus Entertainment having worked on it, though. So imagine my surprise recently when I was just picking up my saved eBay search for Star Wars The Legacy Revealed and came across this. Yet another version of Star Wars The Legacy Revealed on another preview/screener type of DVD, still without any kind of retail release. But this one is a little different. So what you have here is from Prometheus Entertainment, is their internal preview DVD. It says, reveals details that might be new even to lifelong Star Wars fans. Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, Star Wars The Legacy Revealed. Then that image there that is very much like the image that we saw on the label for the more elaborate, unfinished screener version. The spine there has Vader at the top, Prometheus Entertainment logo at the bottom, and then Star Wars The Legacy Revealed running down here. No product numbers or anything like that. The back, and I can read it for you here, but quick little summary here. Images mainly from Revenge of the Sith, and then cast crew information, copyright date of 2007, for promotional use only, blah, blah, blah. 5.1 version, legalese, History Channel, and Prometheus Entertainment stuff there. I know it's kind of reflective here, hence not holding it up the entire time. The back says, Star Wars The Legacy Revealed takes an in-depth look at George Lucas's epic 6-part saga and examines such diverse influences as Greek and Roman mythology, history, religion, and politics. Featuring insightful interviews with notable authors, historians, politicians, filmmakers, and journalists, this 2-hour documentary reveals the fascinating and often surprising elements that have made Star Wars an enduring motion picture series and cultural phenomenon. The program was nominated for 3 Emmy Awards, including Outstanding Directing, Outstanding Writing, and Outstanding Nonfiction Special. Now inside, no insert or anything like that, but you do have the disc itself, which is on a DVD-R, being an internal preview type thing. But the cool label here, Star Wars The Legacy Revealed, Prometheus Entertainment, History Channel, back when it was called The History Channel, not just History, DVD video. Then underneath you got promotional use only, not for resale, 5.1 version, and all the legalese kind of stuff down there as well. Now, I thought, that's pretty cool. I like it. This might be my go-to way of watching this. Instead of watching one of those other like screeners and whatnot, I'll just pop this in and check it out. It's been a while since I've seen it. And immediately upon putting it in, I was like, wait, what? For a couple of reasons. First, the opening was different. And I initially thought, okay, it's just that the opening itself is different. Not a big deal or anything like that. But I thought, you know what? Maybe there's more that's different here. And I took a look at the runtime. The runtime for the version that aired on History Channel, which is found in its unfinished version on 2 of those screeners, and the finished version on the other 2 of those screeners, is basically an hour and a half long, right? Give or take, because of course it's 2 hours, but you have to take out the commercials. This claims to be a 2-hour special, right? A 2-hour documentary. So of course, you would assume 2 hours, but then you get the commercials. It's more like an hour and a half. That's just their promotional text. No. This is basically a 2-hour cut. It's an hour and 57 minutes or so, give or take. This is a longer, different cut of Star Wars The Legacy Revealed. The only place I have ever come across this longer, more elaborate cut of the special. And I was so enthralled by that I did a side-by-side comparison. Open up one in one program, one in another program, watch them side by side and watch where they differ, and then realign them and watch where they differ again, and so on, which is really kind of painstaking and kind of a pain in the ass. But I really wanted to see how it was different. And in doing so, made notes on the many different things about this version of Legacy revealed. So if you'll pardon me going into the weeds a little bit, I do want to detail that as we go. I'm not going to show you everything. That would take forever. That'd be like one of those Clone Wars cuts episodes, and it's way too much, usually in small doses, to really approach that way. When I mentioned Clone Wars cuts, early on in this series from the Star Wars Home Video Library, I did do a series that showed the differences in different cuts of the Clone Wars episodes for basically seasons 1 through 6. Where those differences did actually exist from home media to airing and that sort of thing. Now, for this one thing I do want to show you when I say that there are differences, to give you a feel for the differences between these two different previous screener cuts that I had talked about and this one, and how very different the opening of this one really is, I want to actually show you the three beginnings here. Assuming, of course, that YouTube doesn't copyright strike it and destroy it, or whatever they do. I'm going to have this marked as non-monetized, so it's not to be an issue, hopefully. But what I'm going to show you here back to back, I'm going to show you the unfinished version of the opening. Now, it's not going to have the time code running along the bottom, but that's just because of the aspect ratio in which I had to capture it. But you'll see sort of you'll hear the narrator for the unfinished version. That's obviously not the finished one. And you'll see some of those clips with the time code that I mentioned when they're using stock footage somewhere along the way. Then, second, you're going to check out the finished version of this opening, right? You'll get to see basically an identical opening, but it will have the final narrator, Robert Clotworthy, and his voice, his sort of iconic voice from most History Channel specials. But then you'll be able to check out the Prometheus Entertainment version of the opening, which is longer, very different, and basically sans narrator. So let's check out those very different intros to give you a feel for the flavor of how these different cuts would be to watch, and then we'll dive into all the many, many differences broken down here by which speaker was speaking at the time. So, here's the openings.
Here they come.
It began as a simple tale of good versus evil and became a worldwide phenomenon.
Star Wars came out, and we went to school the next day, unable to explain to our friends how everything was different now.
So much of my childhood was spent thinking, dreaming, watching, playing Star Wars.
Star Wars evolved into a 6-chapter cinematic saga, one that resonates with some of the most enduring themes found in literature, mythology, religion, and history.
What Star Wars did was bring them right up to date and reach a new generation.
It broke new ground in terms of communicating a message.
Help me, Obi-Wan Kenobi.
I was witnessing the creation of modern myth.
But just why is Star Wars considered the epic tale of our time?
Future generations will still be enthralled by it.
Find out as the Star Wars legacy is finally revealed.
Here they come.
It began as a simple tale of good versus evil and became a worldwide phenomenon.
Star Wars came out, and we went to school the next day, unable to explain to our friends how everything was different now.
So much of my childhood was spent thinking, dreaming, watching, playing Star Wars.
Star Wars evolved into a 6-chapter cinematic saga, one that resonates with some of the most enduring themes found in literature, mythology, religion, and history.
What Star Wars did was bring them right up to date and reach a new generation.
It broke new ground in terms of communicating a message.
Help me, Obi-Wan Kenobi.
I was witnessing the creation of modern myth.
But just why is Star Wars considered the epic tale of our time?
Future generations will still be enthralled by it.
Find out as the Star Wars legacy is finally revealed.
Star Wars came out when I was 13. I remember wanting to save the ticket and somehow thinking this was significant, even though I knew nothing about the movie. But they said, no, you gotta give the tickets. But they gave us buttons back that said, may the Force be with you. And I meant to bring one today, but I still have it on my workbench at home.
Star Wars was my childhood. So much of my childhood was spent thinking, dreaming, watching, playing Star Wars.
It was the first time I'd seen a movie that connected to a kind of a pop culture experience, and it became this kind of unifying clarion call for the entire country, because there was something everybody could relate to.
Whether it was a fairy tale for children, an allegory for adults, or just sheer entertainment, it broke new ground in terms of communicating a message.
Help me, Obi-Wan Kenobi.
So many things intrigued me when I first saw it. What struck me right away was the ancient and enduring themes with which the film was dealing.
I want to learn the ways of the Force and become a Jedi like my father.
The technology was thrilling, the enthusiasm of the audience, and right away what I felt were classical and mythological resonances in it.
I felt I was not watching something that was like myth, but that was myth. I was witnessing the creation of modern myth in my own lifetime.
The entire saga manages to fuse the completely timeless with the absolutely timely. And when that happens, the culture, snaps it up like nothing else, because we do have a need to go through that mythic journey.
May the Force be with you.
May the Force be with you.
And it wouldn't be appealing to so many different people, so many different walks of life and age groups, if it wasn't capturing the hopes, and fears, and values that we have as a people.
Pretty cool, huh? Just very, very different when you get to that Prometheus version. So, there's a lot of different guests, a lot of different experts speaking in the special itself. I want to go through them one by one and tell you what topics that person talks about in footage that is apparently only on this version, not on the one aired on History Channel or on any of those other cuts on the other screeners here. So let's see. We have Mary Henderson, author of Star Wars: The Magic of Myth, who has a lot of stuff cut out, talking about the 3 stages of the hero's journey, Threshold Guardians, Padme sort of embodying the sort of there, not there nature of goddesses when she is or is not in makeup, dying to your old self, as in the case of Han going into Carbonite and then being reborn, essentially, the difficult, painful aspects of growing up as symbolized in a monster to overcome, choices and human potential, the orange pilot jumpsuits of the rebels being reminiscent of naval pilots in the 1960s for the United States, and the Ewoks in the Battle of Endor as the essence of the David and Goliath type of conflict. Then you have Dr. Jonathan Young, who is the founding curator of the Joseph Campbell Archives, who has cut material talking about the Arthur/Merlin parallels found within Star Wars, and the quirkiness at first of mentors like with Yoda in Empire. Siegfried and the passing of a sword from father to son as a parallel to Star Wars. The appeal of Jar Jar Binks to kids with an awkward animal nature, and the idea of accord with nature and people of the surface versus essentially the people of the interior when we're talking about Naboo, and tech versus nature, and the idea that the best cause will win. Peter Jackson, director, of course, filmmaker from Lord of the Rings, etc., talking about the destiny that you did not know and must discover. Stephen Gallipo, if I'm saying that correctly, Galipeau, who wrote The Journey of Luke Skywalker, talks about Jedi and Eastern tradition, introverted versus extroverted versions of spirituality as represented in Eastern culture and in Star Wars. C-3PO being not good at telling stories, and yet then his storytelling ability being the key to getting the Ewoks as allies in part when we get to Return of the Jedi, and the concept of temptation. Then we have Dr. Kevin J. Whitmore Jr., author of The Empire Triumphant, who talks about Yoda being the Sanskrit for warrior, and the philosophy of when to and not to fight. Rome as a real-world example of a republic with a senate that becomes an empire. Predatory capitalism and whatnot, as seen in the Separatist Alliance. The Trade Federation as a parallel possibly to Enron, given the time period in which it was made. How imperial costumes were designed to invoke the idea, or evoke, I guess, the visual of Imperial Japan in the World War II era. And, of course, another comment on the Ewoks versus the Empire, as many of them have here. Then Matthew Bortolin, if I'm saying that correctly, author of The Dharma of Star Wars, talking about Buddhist thoughts about being mindful and mindfulness, particularly in relation to the opening of Phantom Menace. Dr. John C. Lydon, professor of religion at Dana College, A lot of stuff cut from him. How the big three complement each other. Anakin's male and female companions as well, as a parallel to the male and female companions back in the original trilogy. The idea that law doesn't exist on the frontier, and basically Han Solo as sort of a cowboy figure. Expectations on Anakin as the chosen one, and how there's no guarantee that he will actually meet those expectations. Palpatine as a mentor, making Anakin break with his non-violent code. The Hitler parallel, that he was elected as the Weimar Republic fell, and it became, of course, you know, the Nazi regime and so forth. The burning of the Reichstag being parallel in there. Let's see, freedom decreasing so that safety can increase in the hands of a dictator, parallels to Napoleon. And the Ewoks in the Battle of Endor being kind of like Robin Hood and his merry men, and again, a tech versus nature theme. Then filmmaker Kevin Smith, yes, of Clerks and Dogma and so on, talking about Leia's strengths as a female character, being sort of different for the time, and Han as a role model, as he calls him, a pirate and a pimp, okay, and a so-called hard case with a heart of gold. Then Dr. Carol A. Rubino, professor of classics at Hamilton College, talks about Leia as a parallel to Ariadne and others in mythology, and Theseus in the Labyrinth as a parallel, something that has parallels within Star Wars. Then Joss Whedon, filmmaker, in one that hasn't aged well, about how Han was the guy with the juice and how Joss Whedon was the first man among his friends to predict that Han and Leia would end up together. Then we have let's see, the narrator talks about droids as supporters to the hero, low-standing, often overlooked, and so on, at which point Linda Ellerby, a journalist, has a cut segment where she talks about basically the idea, you know, the Shakespearean chorus as sort of representing what the droids do, how they're useful, the talk of doom oftentimes, and so forth. And the idea, to put it in Hamlet terms as opposed to her terms here, the idea that the devil would assume a pleasing shape. Very much about the idea that, you know, Palpatine would be seductive, not just outright obviously evil. And then the narrator does talk about an ineffectual Senate, which brings us to cut content from Dr. Carl Silvio, co-editor of Culture, Identities, and Technologies in the Star Wars films, who talks about Padme in Phantom Menace having faith in the system, but it being an uncritical faith, and the idea of sort of the critique of naive belief. He also talks about the Separatists as dehumanizing forms of capitalism. Then Dr. Joan Britton Connolly, Associate Professor of Fine Arts at NYU, talks about the balance of light and dark. Only two more, I promise. We have Dan Rather, journalist, talking about the seductiveness of evil. And then finally, we have Dr. Camille Paglia, Professor of Humanities and Media Studies at the University of the Arts, talking about the Empire versus the Ewoks as kind of like the Romans versus the barbarians as the Roman Empire was falling, and how large, bloated empires are typically vulnerable to small terrorist groups. That is a lot of stuff. And most of it is in like little 1 minute or less little snippets here and there, like just little comments between parts that do exist in the finished aired version and in the unfinished screener. But all of those are actually built into the narrative of this version, the Prometheus Entertainment version of Star Wars: The Legacy Revealed. I am super stoked to have found this. Like I said, it's my absolute favorite documentary on anything Star Wars related. And to be able to have a version I didn't know existed that is essentially a massive expanded cut compared to what I had previously known to exist, that was really, really cool. So if you're looking for Star Wars: The Legacy Revealed, you'll see some screeners pop up from time to time. The fan site's not very often. That fancy one, not very often. But you will tend to see the press and the Emmy screeners pop up fairly often on eBay. You might want to keep an eye out also for this one, because this one will give you more content if you happen to be able to find it. Again, I lucked into it. Couldn't tell you where to find it other than just scouring eBay as I typically do. So, a great version, an expanded version of a really great documentary here. With that, we'll wrap up this episode. Thank you for watching, and may the Force be with the home video viewers.